Okay, thank you everybody for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started. For those who just signed on, your speakers and your video are currently muted. While we're going through the presentation, please feel free to put any questions in the chat. And at the end of the presentation, we'll probably have time where we can unmute everyone's speakers and give you a chance to ask questions. We have quite a few people on here who weren't present during our first webinar. So I know we had listed it in the request for applications as more of a Q&A, but we are going to go ahead and go through the presentation again, just for those who weren't able to join on the first webinar. And we should still have plenty of time at the end to go over questions. So with that, I'm going to do some real quick introductions of our staff that are here on the webinar with us today. I'll go first. My name is Amanda Swanson. I've been with the Division of Agriculture for over 12 years. And I currently manage the grant and marketing section, and I'll be one of the presenters today for this. And next to Christy, would you like to introduce yourself?
So I am Christy Short. I am a Division of Ag employee as well, here working in the grants and marketing team, and I will be doing the first half of the presentation for you.
Mary?
Hi, I'm Mary Rowland. I'm the Grants Administrator for Division of Agriculture. I've been with the division for just over a year and 3 months, and I've been a Grants Administrator with the state of Alaska for 18 years.
And Penny? Tony, are you there? Tony might not be able to unmute right now.
She's having a hard time with her mute.
Okay, no problem. Let's go ahead and get started. And so we'll go to our first slide, and then I'll hand it over to you, Christy.
Let me unmute myself there. Okay. So we are here to learn about the Resilient Food Systems Infrastructure Grant, this whole program and how it works. So from the beginning, though, here's the funding source. So there was $420 million from the American Rescue Plan that will be awarded to all the states and territories. Alaska will be receiving approximately $2.2 million on that one, and that's about right still. USDA AMS awards these funds to the U.S. State Departments of Agriculture, or divisions, as we are. And then from there, these state departments of agriculture award funds through a competitive grant process for sub-grant awards. Sub-grantees, which would be you, and provides administration of these awards. Next. So what is the purpose of these grants? The purpose of the RFSI grant, or RFSI for short, this grant program is to assist in building resiliency in the middle of the food supply chain by strengthening local and regional food systems, creating more diverse local and regional market options, increasing economic opportunities for communities, and opening new revenue streams for producers. Keep that all in mind. Targeted for processing and aggregation distribution stages of the food supply chain. And there are two types of grant projects that are available. We've got a simplified equipment only project, and then we've got the infrastructure grants. Next slide, please. Qualifying projects. So what does a qualifying project look like? What qualifies? Specialty crops for human consumption, dairy, grains for human consumption, aquaculture, and other food products for human consumption. Starting to see a trend there. What does not qualify for this? Meat, poultry, grain not for human consumption, and floriculture. So any of those specialty crops for human consumption, this could be anything from potatoes to and grains, so oats, wheat, barley, things like that. So next slide. Funding priorities. The top 5 funding priorities were identified through the division's industry survey based on ranked votes. So the first funding priority is going to be expanding processing capacities, including adding product types, increasing production volumes, and supporting new wholesale or retail product lines. We are also putting a priority on purchase and installation of specialized equipment, such as processing components, sorting equipment, packing and labeling equipment, or delivery vehicles. A third one will be modernizing equipment or facilities through upgrades, repairs, or retooling. For example, adapting product lines for institutional procurement or adding a parallel processing capacity. The fourth one is increasing storage space, including cold storage, which is really important up here for us, oddly enough. Number 5, construction of a new facility, a completely brand new facility, and as long as you meet certain requirements. Next slide. So the application timeline. So the announcement of the request for applications were released January 15th. So we're already a month into this. The application period is open for 60 days, and we've already been in here for 30 already, almost. And the application deadline is March 15th at 5 p.m. So you got 30 more days to put together a proposal of either the equipment-only grant or an infrastructure grant, but one or the other, not both. Announcement will be made via press release, social media sites, and Division of Agriculture's grant page. So if you have more questions, please go to our grant page and look up RFSI on there. The applications will undergo a competitive review process by the review committee. And then sub-grantees that are selected and will be submitted to the USDA for approval by March 29th of this year. Selected and USDA approved sub-grantees in contract will happen by May of 2024 this year and start receiving their first advances. Sub-grantees for the infrastructure grants, that's the second type, will have approximately 3 years to complete their grant project. So their project timeline is May 2024 through May 2027. Kind of nice. All right, next slide. Simplified equipment only projects. So this is that first type we were talking about. This grant project is between the amounts of a minimum of $10,000 and a maximum of $100,000 for equipment only purchases or middle of the food supply chain, right? Fixed price grant is what this is. It'll be awarded, you'll be awarded the amount that will be equal to the cost of the equipment, up to $100,000. But it's including the freight, which is a really big deal because not all, it usually doesn't always include shipping. This one does. The other good thing about this type of grant is there's no match required for this type. You don't have to do any type of match. There was one other thing I wanted to say about this simplified equipment only project. When you do this type of grant, make sure it's all within the same scope of project. All right, next slide. The infrastructure grant is a minimum of $100,000, and it is a 3-year grant performance period. So you'll have a lot longer of a performance period to build that new structure that you need, get pieces and parts up here and assembled and put into your assembly line. Those things do take time, so it is a 3-year grant performance period. Applicants must submit evidence that critical resources and infrastructure necessary to support the initiation and completion of a project are in place. We do have a template for that, so you'll find that on our website. Now with this one, there is a match requirement, 50%, and that's 50% of the total proposed project cost. And there will be more on this later, so we'll explain that. So there is an exception though. Those who qualify for the reduced match as historically underserved farmers and ranchers, or those businesses that qualify under the SBA categories, the match can be and is reduced down to 25%. So that might be helpful to look into. All right, next slide. So what is match? Matching is the portion of project costs not paid by the federal funds, which could be cash and or in-kind contributions. So cash can be a financial outlay or cash donations from non-federal third-party funds. Pardon me. In-kind can be the value of non-cash contributions, typically in the form of value of personnel, of goods, and of services. So the other thing to really note on here is that other federal funds cannot be used as your match. And if you need to do that, match that 50%. So let's say your total project amount is $200,000. What's 50% of that? $100,000. So your federal refund that you're requesting, we have a minimum of $100,000 that we're requesting. And your cost share match amount is going to be $100,000. And why is this not making sense to me right now? Because my brain is dead. That could possibly be it. So if you have a $300,000 project, that kind of sounds. What's going on? Amanda, help me out here. Why does this look funny to me on this screen right now?
So with match, you're paying 50% of the overall total project cost. So
yeah,
say the total
federal
project
funds requested is only 100,000 here, so your cost share amount should only be 50, right?
No, it'd still be 100,000 because it's 50% based off of the total project amount. So your total project's 200,000. You request a grant for 100,000, and then you're matching that other half of the total project cost.
Okay, sorry, my brain was gone, guys.
I do, since we're kind of paused here though, regarding some of the questions that we've been getting, when you're applying for a grant, especially an infrastructure grant, and you're calculating how much the match is, you want the project scope, like the amount you'd be applying for the infrastructure, only apply for the part that addresses the middle of the supply chain activity for your project. So, and again, I really want to stress that that is what this infrastructure or this RFSI grant is for middle of the supply chain. So think processing, aggregation, and distribution. It's those 3 phases. So say you wanted to build a commercial kitchen. Some parts of that might not necessarily fall within the, the construction of the facility, and everything might not all completely fall within middle of supply chain activity. So you want to only apply for the portion of it that is meeting that middle of the supply chain. So then your match is only 50% of that, if that makes any sense. And we can clarify that later on too. But go ahead, Christy.
Yeah. Also, I apologize. I do have a head cold right now, so my brain's not working. Then I guess we're on to the next slide, yeah? Great, here we are. So eligible applicants. Eligible applicants would be any agricultural producers or processors or groups of agricultural processors, producers and processors. So all you farmers out there, nonprofit organizations, local governments, tribal governments, institutions, all the schools, universities, hospitals, bringing producers together to establish a cooperative or shared infrastructure or invest in equipment that will benefit multiple producers. And all entities must be operating middle of the supply chain. I can't stress this enough. Middle of the supply chain activities, such as processing, aggregation, and or distribution of targeted agricultural products. All right, next slide. Individual businesses can apply for this grant, however. It will be considered more competitive if it benefits underserved farmers and ranchers, new and beginning farmers or ranchers, veteran producers, processors. Yes, here we go. And middle of the supply chain activities owned by socially disadvantaged individuals as defined by the SPA. So projects that offer family supporting job quality and treatment, safety of workers, focus on small and medium-sized enterprises that add options and choices for consumers and producers, like value-added products, demonstrate local support the underserved communities, are submitted by cooperatives, farmer, and worker-owned enterprises. States may prioritize specific markets such as institutions, retail, food hubs, aggregators, wholesalers, and distributors, and or market channels that respond to food access challenges in the state. Next slide. So allowable use examples. So on-farm post-harvest processing, preservation, and storage, cold storage, washing, packaging, labeling, all that fun stuff. Improvements, rearrangements, or alterations of an existing building or facility to use the space more effectively and to accommodate new or upgraded equipment and processes. Construction of new buildings or structural changes to an existing building or a facility, resulting in square footage expansion or requiring changes to the building's floor, foundation, and exterior or load-bearing walls. Special purpose vehicles relevant to the scope of work on an infrastructure grant project. For example, delivery vehicles or refrigerated trucks. And those should really focus on the aggregation of products, that middle of the supply chain part. Repair or update existing equipment. Retail-related activities such as creating distribution channels to new retail opportunities, expanding processing and packaging capabilities, capacities, and adding product types, increasing production volume, and supporting new retail product lines. All of those great things are allowable use examples. Next slide. Maybe. There we go. So more examples of allowable activities. Training on the use of the equipment that you just purchased under the grant. Hiring term limited personnel to assist with project implementation. Analyzing potential facility upgrades and changes that meet regulatory requirements. Obtaining design and or architecture services. Planning for hazard analysis critical control points, your HACCP, or any other food safety or worker safety measures. All right, next. Even more examples. Let's get into it some more. So upgrades or new facilities for processing specific agricultural products such as post-harvest cleaning and grading, aggregator warehouse and storage, including cooperatives, purchase of freezing equipment, a freezer or cold storage, processing, canning, preserving, and pasteurization, preparation and packing, drying, hulling, shelling, and milling, cooking, baking, juicing, distilling, fermenting. Those are all middle of the supply chain. It's all post-harvest stuff. And on your way to making delicious value-added products. All right, next slide. Pardon. So unallowable use examples. Production activities or costs, including farm equipment, tools, supplies, gardening, or production-related labor training, anything that is pre-harvest. Acquisition of buildings, facilities, or land. This won't buy the building and it won't buy the land. It has to be an existing building or land. Purchase of general use vehicles. So nothing that can just be used for everyday things. These are things that were specialized. We need specialized vehicles. Projects focused on meat and poultry processing. Not going to fly. That's part of our unallowable ones. There's a lot more grant opportunities for those specific projects there. Projects that have already received funding from another federal grant or subaward program. However, infrastructure grants may build on the success of prior funding, such as USDA Regional Food Business Centers, Business Builder subawards, to fund subsequent activities. So that is possible. Next slide. So if you have any questions, you can always email us right here at that website right there, email address. If you have more, if you just want to learn more about it, there's a website right there from USDA. USDA's definition of a specialty crop, got all that information there. We also have all of these listed on our state website, and you are more than welcome to go there too. I see that there's been a lot of questions in the chat, and they've been getting answered as we go, which is great. So if you are unfamiliar with what our website is, it's dnr.alaska.gov/AG for ag. And once you're on there, you'll just go to programs and then click on grants. And the very top one is going to be your Resilient Food Systems Infrastructure Program. At this time, I would like to open up the floor to any questions. And if you can go ahead and, or hand it to Amanda. I think I might hand it to Amanda. Amanda, what would you like to say?
Thanks, Christy. I'll go and change the settings here in a moment to unmute you so you can ask questions, but you can keep putting them in the chat and we'll respond to them as we go. So I'm going to stop sharing for just a second. I did want to real quickly run over the applications and then also address some of the questions that we have been getting because other people might have similar questions. So first, I'll share my screen again. So first, we'll go over the equipment only grant proposals. And this is one of the things that I wanted to clarify that we've gotten further clarification from USDA on. So the grant amounts for this type of project need to be anywhere between 10,000 to 100,000 is the max, 10,000 is the minimum. But if you are needing multiple pieces of equipment, like say you wanted to put in a processing line or an assembly line for value-added processing and needed multiple pieces of equipment. Not every piece of equipment needs to be at least 10,000. So if you have, pieces of equipment that are under 10,000, that's fine. You can apply for all the equipment that you need for that assembly line in the same equipment only grant proposal, as long as it's within the same project scope. But the total has to be at least 10,000 and it can't exceed 100,000. If you need multiple pieces of equipment, but they're different kind of parts of the project, then you would have to complete 2 different equipment only applications for that. So say you wanted to put in an assembly line for value-added processing, but then you also need a delivery vehicle. Those would be considered 2 different project scopes. And so that would be 2 different equipment only grant proposals that you would submit. We have had USDA also tell us you have to pick one or the other. So if you'll have to decide what's going to be best, you know, for what you're trying to do and for your project. Do you just need equipment? Or do you need the infrastructure? Because you can apply for equipment under the infrastructure proposal if that's part of your total project. So you're going to have to decide, you know, pick one or the other. Either you're applying for the equipment only or the infrastructure, but you can't submit an application for both. We had a question in here, are indirect costs included in the total project cost for match? Yes, so you can claim indirect cost on the application, but again, match is based off of your total project cost, not what you're requesting for the grant. So you'll have your budget for your grant that you're requesting, which is half of the project cost. And that's where you'll have your budget breakdown for your direct cost and your indirect cost. And then you'll also have the half of the project that you have to match unless you qualify for a reduced match, and then that can be down to 25%. So again, the match is based off of your overall total project cost, not what you're requesting in the grant. So on the application, you'll need to put your basic information. You will need a UEI number. And I believe we have links on our website for how you can get the UEI number, who's going to be the primary point of contact on the grant, and who's going to be responsible for assigning any documentation should the grant be awarded. Distress Community Index. You click on the link here, it'll bring you up with a map, and you can find it'll give you a distress score. We have had questions that we have a lot of rural Alaska communities that aren't even on the Distress Community Index. We asked USDA how they would prefer what they prefer us to put on the application, and their response was essentially, don't worry about it. They have the same issues with a lot of the territories as well. So if your community is not, if you can't find it on there, then just go ahead and leave this blank for now. Then you'll identify what type of applicant you are. Again, an agricultural producer or processors or a group of producers and processors, for-profit entity, local government, nonprofit, tribal government or institution. Again, like Christy said, you have to be operating middle of the supply chain activity. Then you'll put in a project title, must be 15 words or less, an executive summary, so 250 words or less. This executive summary, if your grant application is funded, USDA provides a list of summary of projects that were funded with the grant, and that would become public information. So that would get posted to their website. So keep that in mind when you're writing your executive summary, that this is something that would go on a national website if your project is selected to be funded. You'll go over your project purpose. Whether it's processing, aggregation, or distribution. I believe you can select multiple, just depending on your project, or value-added production, and type of agricultural food products processed with the equipment that you are requesting. And these are interactive forms, so you can add as many rows as you want. You can remove rows. So you just would click on the button and you can add additional product type. Here's where you'll describe the current business operations, including services being offered in the geographic focus area. And then you're going to describe the specific need that the equipment that you're requesting will address, and the impact that the equipment will have on local and regional producers, market outlets, and more. The number of local and regional producers that will be impacted, and whether it's going to help to underserve farmers and ranchers, new and beginning farmers and ranchers, veteran producers, or processors in the middle of supply chain owned by socially disadvantaged individuals. Next, you'll select your outcomes. So there's, I believe, just 2 options. So outcome 2, does your project build capacity in the middle of supply chain? Or outcome 3, does it increase economic viability of local and regional producers and processors? So what outcomes and indicators you select here, you will have to report on at the end of your final report. And that's something I don't think we mentioned earlier either, but it's in the request for applications. The equipment only projects, they're just for a 1-year term. So you'll just have one final report that you submit at the end of the project. For the infrastructure grants, those are 3-year projects. So you'll have your, I think, quarterly or annual reports, and then you'll also have your final report at the end of the project. And so any outcomes and indicators that you select here, you're going to have to report on in your final reports. And then here's the budget narrative. So here's where you would list the cost of the equipment. So when you submit your equipment project proposal, you will have to include with it the verification of the cost of the equipment that you're requesting. So you'll have to include like invoices. I think we give a list of examples in our request for applications that you'll need to provide, but any kind of quotes that show what the total cost is, because that's what we base the grant award off of. So you will have to have your equipment already kind of pre-selected and have your invoices and your quotes for that equipment. And if you are getting multiple pieces of equipment, they do have to all be purchased at the same time. So the acquisition date will have to be the same for all the equipment. And then you'll give your equipment justification here. So that was just a real quick rundown of the equipment application. The infrastructure grant application is going to be pretty similar. So straightforward contact information. Again, with the stress community index, what type of applicant you are, your project title, duration of the project. So we do have 3 years, but if you think your project is going to be less than 3 years, you could select a shorter project date if you want. But we don't have any early penalties for if you complete your project early. So I would suggest, especially on the infrastructure projects, sometimes things happen to take longer than planned, go ahead and request the full 3 years. That way you give yourself plenty of time to complete the project. And then we have the executive summary here. So select project purpose. Here you can select multiple different types of projects, or multiple purposes, I mean, that your project is gonna address. Here's where you would give a more description of the need or problem that your project is going to address. Objectives, this is more like the goals for what your project is going to achieve. That's what we mean by objectives. So what are the goals for the project? The number of beneficiaries. So how many producers is your project going to impact? Does it help to benefit underserved farmers and ranchers, new and beginning farmers and ranchers, or veterans, or socially disadvantaged individuals? Has this project received funding from other federal or state grant programs? And you'll have to provide evidence of support for your project, for external project support. And then here again are a number of outcomes and indicators that you can select. So you do want to select which ones apply, but keep in mind any that you select, you'll also have to report on. So you don't want to go, kind of overboard with selecting, because then that's more that you have to track and collect data on. So kind of like we do with the specialty crop, we normally recommend you select 2 to 3 outcomes and indicators. But again, select the ones that are going to apply to you. So project start date, you can put, we have a question in the chat here, when you anticipate beginning construction. I think that you would put that in your project description. So the grants that are selected for funding, the contract is going to be the same for everybody for regarding the infrastructure grants. It's going to go from May of this year to May of 2027. And the project, you know, you have to make sure that you're going to be able to complete the project within that grant performance period. So, but you can do your project start date for when you anticipate beginning construction in the application, but if it's selected for funding, all the contracts are going to be the same. It's going to be from May 2024 to May 2027. Unless, like I mentioned earlier, you decide you want a shorter grant performance period, you can select, you know, I only need 2 years for the project. My end date is going to be May 2026. But again, you know, you have up to the full 3 years. I would just suggest go ahead and take in the full 3 years if you complete your project early, as long as you've met all of the, you know, your project scope and all the requirements of the grant. There's no penalty for that. You are able to do a self-certification if you qualify for the 25% graduated match. So we have links to the SBA definitions on our website, so you can go view that website and determine whether or not you fall within that that reduced match requirement. On infrastructure grants, you'll provide your breakdown. So here is where you'd claim, you know, if there's any personnel for working on the project, if there's going to be any benefits, travel, equipment, supplies, construction. And so here's, you'll put for funds requested, the amount, if there's any match value and match type. So is it cash or is it in-kind contribution? So say you have a contractor who's willing to volunteer their time, that would count as like in-kind contribution. I believe that you can also include the value of the property, that's going to be providing the critical infrastructure for your project, but it's only the portion of the property that is directly involved in that middle of the supply chain activity. Here you'll list the personnel, the people who are going to be working on the project, and the justification for each of the budget categories, your fringe benefit, travel. Again, for each of these budget categories, you'll have to provide a justification. So I won't go into detail on each of these different categories, but if you have any questions, feel free to reach out, or we can also talk about them now during this webinar. So I just wanted to go over those real quick. We'll stop sharing, and if you give me just a moment, I'll unmute everybody, and then we can address any questions.
So Amanda, can you tell us how we get to those templates and applications, and how do we feel like, I know there's a special way to do it. Can you explain that?
Yes, so let me bring up our Division of Ag site here. I'm going to share again. So this is our website here that's got information about the RFSI. It's got the request for applications and the templates are equipment only or infrastructure only. So because these are interactive templates, when you go to try and open them up, and I don't know if it'll work on my computer because I've already downloaded these so many times, but you do have to download. You'll see a little arrow button here, and save it to your documents folder or to your desktop first, and then go and open it from there. So it won't automatically open on your web browser. You may actually get a error message if you try to do that. So when you click on it, you should see a little arrow where it's downloading the document first. Then you'll save that to your desktop or to your documents folder. And I should have unmuted everybody, but let's see. I don't see that it's updated yet. One second.
The link has been put in the chat as to how to get to the Division of Ag's website, to the RFSI site.
When we
Okay.
finish our application and have our paperwork in order, is there a mechanism by which we can have our documents audited before the final submission from people who might be more qualified to find errors in the documentation?
You mean whether or not our grant staff will review it to look for errors?
Maybe not even so much officially, but just like where
For
you would
completeness?
add your expertise into looking for possible issues with our application.
Yeah, we'll reach out to you if we notice that there's any documentation missing that you might need to submit.
So the earlier we get it in, the sooner you would look at it and it would give you more time to possibly make us aware of an issue.
Right, so we can't go into like detail because we don't want to create like any kind of conflict or favoritism, but say you submit an equipment only template and you forget to include the critical resource template that goes with it, we'll email you and say, hey, you know, we need a critical resource template from you too. Can you take care of that real quick?
I don't mean to hog the stage, but I'm mostly thinking of when it comes to in-kind contributions, I'm concerned about if I put an in-kind contribution on there and then it is invalidated for some reason, is that going to affect my ability to get the grant?
No, it might impact your overall score with the reviewers because they're going to be scoring you based off of completeness. But so I wouldn't say it's going to necessarily disqualify you, but it would impact your review score. But then the projects that are selected for funding, we might, you know, go back to you and say if there's any additional edits that we need you to make before it goes to USDA, because all of these applications need final approval through USDA. Because again, we're just, you know, the administrative agency. We might, you know, send it back to you and say, you know, you've been selected for funding, but, you know, this cost in here wasn't allowable. Can you replace it with an allowable cost or something like that? Or, you know, the match, that match isn't considered, you know. So those are kind of factors to take into consideration. And Christy, I think you had a comment.
I did, but you covered it. Never mind.
Okay. And we are trying to get a match calculator on our site too. Some of the other states have been adding that onto their site. So we should hopefully have something up here shortly that can help you calculate the match requirements.
Would this also include stuff that was done within a given period of time before the request was made?
No. So when you're submitting it, it's all for a project. So anything that you completed previously wouldn't count towards the project for the grant that you're requesting. Any other questions?
I think there's a question in the chat for the critical resources template. Is that all that's needed to submit to prove critical resources are secured? Is that letter template, or do we need to show the title to the land?
Good question. I don't think that you need to provide proof, like as far as the title, like the title or your deeds. But I would be prepared to be able to do so in case USDA requests it. That is something too that I also want to mention is we've been informed by USDA that we also will be required to, states are going to be required to do environmental reviews. on the infrastructure projects because the infrastructure projects do have to follow all the NEPA requirements. So they're going to be, they're providing some training to the states on that. So that's something that we'll be required to do as well prior to a project being selected for funding, is to complete an environmental review. Go ahead, Jake.
Okay, I'm sorry for hogging the floor here, but I do have a lot of questions.
That's no problem.
On the application, it says external project support. Describe the stakeholders who support the need for this project and why, other than the applicant and the organizations involved in the project. So I'm struggling mostly with the latter half of that. So this is all like an in-house thing, but there are a lot of organizations that are involved in the project in the sense of they're guiding what their needs are during the project. Like they're not benefiting financially directly other than the fact that now we can help them, whereas we couldn't before. And so would I just put people who have a stake in the success of the project, and would you guys prefer to have like letters of recommendation attached to that, or like names and contact information? When I'm filling that field out, what is the appropriate information for that field? And do you want me to send perhaps letters from the individuals along with the application?
Yeah, so we do something kind of similar to with the specialty crop block grant, because our specialty crop block grant is very much geared towards like research and market projects that will benefit industry as a whole, and we require letters of support for that grant as well. So any letters that you have to you know, that from people who are stakeholders that support the need for the project and why, that's going to help your application be more competitive. Again, these are competitive grants. We're going to probably get a lot more applications than what we have funding available for. So the more external project support that your grant project has, the more competitive it's going to be. So you want to keep in mind that the projects must create, let me go back up to my note here, I put it in the chat, but it has to help create better or more market opportunities and new streams of revenue for small and mid-sized agricultural producers. So kind of like Christy mentioned earlier, if you're an individual, like for-profit company, you can apply for an infrastructure grant, but again, it's going to be more competitive if it can help other producers. So say you want to put in a value added, you know, processing line, and you want to make like soup mixes, and you're going to be able to source product from multiple producers. That's going to help create more market opportunity for those producers, new streams of revenue. So that's kind of how it's helping to benefit other producers, but it's addressing middle of the supply chain activity, which is that value added processing. So I hope I answered your question there.
It gave me another one though.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
okay. It's no problem.
So if as a for-profit company, the actual purpose of the grant is to be able to serve nonprofits, schools, universities, in fact, the entire list. Mm-hmm. So am I being viewed as a for-profit business, or is this being kind of calculated more as though it's the school, it's the university, it's the, or is that just basically you guys have to figure it out when you get the when you get the application?
You would identify as a for-profit because you are the applicant. So as the applicant, you're going to identify what you fall under. So either for-profit, or if you're if you're applying as a tribal organization or a producer, that's where you're going to identify who you as the applicant is, not who you're going to be serving in the project. That's where you'll identify in your project outline and description who's going to be benefiting from your project.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Any other questions? I know it's a lot of information to absorb all at once.
You got time for one more?
Yep,
Okay.
we're here for another half hour, so you got plenty of time.
Increase, it says on the application, increase economic viability of local regional producers and processors. Number of new jobs created. Is that in-house, or does that include the people who will be able to hire as a result of the project, including not the applicant? So basically what I'm saying is, as an example, I have a producer right now that would be one of the producers that falls under the description of who you're trying to serve. And the minute that my project finishes, we already know that he has to hire more than one full-time position. Do I include that, or do I only include the jobs that I myself will be creating from this project?
Oh, one second. Where's page did you find that on? Where are you at on the application?
It's on the larger infrastructure grant. Outcome number 3 on page 5. It's right at the bottom of page 5.
Okay, let me take a look at it.
And I think I can rephrase the question a little better too, if you'd like.
Number of new jobs created. Yeah, it's a pretty vague outcome there.
And this is kind of what I was saying about, like, I worry that when I fill out the application, if I don't know how to precisely answer, X or Y question, if I submit it early enough, will you be able to correct my mistake without it counting against me? Or should I wait till the last minute to just keep doing more and more research? Because this is the first time I've ever even tried to write a grant proposal. Okay, but in this particular situation is an excellent example. So it says indicator, description, expected numbers. And in fact, I have questions about the whole list, but number of new jobs created. I am already fully aware that if my project were to be completed, I have producers covered under the direction of the purpose of this grant. Okay. That they would immediately hire, train, and start utilizing the labor of a full-time, like, family supporting income. And am I allowed to count those jobs, or am I only supposed to count the people that I will be hiring as a result of this grant in my own company? Right? Because that's a very different number.
Right. I would say that it's going to be the jobs created as a direct result from your project, or directly from your project, because then on indicator 3.2, it has number of local regional agricultural producers who benefited. Then that's another outcome number there that you would put for the number of producers.
So the
who were
top one is
impacted.
in-house, and then the bottom one is other people who can create jobs.
Right. Christy and Mary, would you, and also on page 4, where it has the estimate the number of project beneficiaries, that's where you could put the sum total of both the jobs that you're planning on creating and then the indirect beneficiaries as well from your project.
So if I were to fill out the application as completely as possible, and then include some of these details in like a written proposal, I think you actually require a written proposal outside of the application, then at least I would be providing the full context then, I guess, right?
Yeah, if you want to add, because I know that there's some word limitation to some of these. If you want to add as like an attachment, more of the, more of a description, you're welcome to do so. But you do have to address each section completely in the application as well. If that makes sense. So you can't just put in there like see attached, and then have the attachment. USDA does want us using their interactive form, so you'd still want to make sure you include a description and address each section on the application itself.
So perhaps like with additional jobs created, X number and then see attached.
On the outcomes?
So yeah, like on the outcomes, if I were to say such and such additional jobs created, see attached for full description.
No, I'd go ahead and answer that on the application. But
Okay.
if you want to add an attachment, just as like supplemental information to like, you want to add, numbers and data and photos, that you don't have room to do so in the application, you can add, attachments to go with it. Couple other just general questions that we know that USDA has been getting. I can go over those if you guys want to. If there's a group of producers that's planning to apply, they would need to be part of a cooperative or LLC, and the applicant entity would need to have a UEI number in order to apply. So that's one of the kind of frequent questions that we get. Going through a couple of the other ones here. Christy, Mary, do you have anything else?
I did not.
I just want to reiterate, because I keep on getting, I got another question in my inbox right now, that we are focusing on middle of the supply chain, not where you start seeds in a greenhouse. This isn't for building a greenhouse. This is for middle of the supply chain activities. So please keep that part in mind. That'll be very, very helpful when we go to score these, because if it's to build a greenhouse with a great watering system, no matter how awesome that sounds, it's going to be disqualified.
Yeah. Sorry, I have an ambulance going on behind me right now. A couple other questions that USDA has been frequently giving or getting that might also be helpful. So installation can be included in the equipment cost, but would the item itself portion of the cost be eligible and the applicant have to have the vendor separate the installation portion out and not receive money for that? Or are we saying that installation included is okay to be paid? USDA's response to that is minimal installation and delivery fees that are included within the equipment total from the vendor or manufacturer can be allowable if it is included within the quote or invoice from the vendor or manufacturer. However, hiring a contractor that will buy the equipment and do the installation and any of the modifications such as electrical would not be allowable under the equipment only grants. So that's something to keep in mind. Some installation fees can be included if it's part of the quote and invoice for the equipment, but you can't hire a contractor to do the installation and then pay the contractor through the equipment only grants. That might fall more under the infrastructure grants. Another question that they got, which might be helpful, is somebody had applicant who buys cucumbers and tomatoes from various sources to make salsa and pickles. Wanted to clarify whether or not that qualifies. USDA's response was if the majority of the agricultural food products being processed for the value-added product are locally and regionally produced, making more market opportunity for these producers, then it could be allowable. However, if they're making salsa and the majority of these food products are being bought at a retailer, this might not align or be competitive for the RFSI. They'd rather see projects that increase market opportunities for local and regional producers. And again, you can't use USDA federal funds for food procurement. So you can't use part of the grant funds to like purchase food to do the value added processing. It's all you know, based on the infrastructure. So food procurement is not an allowable expense. So hopefully some of those common questions helped. We've been getting some questions too about whether or not honey qualifies. Again, this is not for any of the production side of the food supply chain. So like honey extraction would not qualify, but any kind of value added or like bottling, you know, post-harvest activities with honey would qualify. We've also been getting some producers that have asked about doing peony as like a tea or like a food extract for flavoring. That could potentially qualify, but again, this is really kind of based on resiliency in the middle of the food supply chain. So kind of more food product types versus like a food ingredient or a food additive. Those don't really qualify under this program. So if you guys have any other questions, please feel free to send us an email. We're going to be having another webinar here at the end of this month, and we can schedule more too if there's a lot of questions or anyone wants us to go over the application process again. Feel free to let us know. All right, and thank you everyone for attending today.